Hey y'all, welcome back to Resilient and Rowdy. This is your host, Jess, and today this wonderful gentleman, Zack Knight, joins me. Welcome, Zack.
Hey Jess, how's it going? Appreciate you having me.
Hey. Yeah, thank you for coming on. It's going. Just super excited to chat with you today. So, for my audience, I met Zack at this Make the Connection interview shoot, and some of the people on set were telling me like how cool Zach is and the things that he does, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, am I like in the presence of greatness, or like what's going on? And
They
so
were
I
all
did a little
lies. That was the
digging.
bad part. It was all a lie, and they totally were full of it.
So I did some digging, and I'm like, oh yeah, of course I love connecting with people. And then after the fact, I'm like realizing who I just met, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I looked into Zach and I thought he was really interesting, and I would just love to just poke his brain and have my audience get to know him a little bit because he's doing some great things.
Yeah, again, thanks for having me on. I'm super stoked about it. It's funny that the Make the Connection crew is pretty awesome, and that photo shoot. This leads into my background so perfectly. I'm like, hey, I'm essentially related to Ryan Reynolds. So even if you want to call me Brian, just make me look like Ryan Reynolds, and we'll be. I got the photos back. I don't look like Ryan Reynolds, so it's a little bit disappointing. But no, I started my professional career. I was born and raised here in Atlanta. Started my professional career here. Always wanted to get engaged in service of some sort and never really wanted to be tied to a desk. So I came up with a brilliant idea of becoming a police officer. So I jumped into that as a local Atlanta PD side. Did all the fun things on that end. Did the SWAT, narcotics, undercover stuff. Had a lot of fun with that. But thought about doing something bigger and better, and ended up doing everything backwards, but bigger and better, and joined the Army at 28. So my 2 weeks notice from the police department, I had about 7 years there, led into basic training. So I went from kicking indoors with a SWAT team to getting yelled at by a kid, I'll say now, kid that was younger than I was and had his like first assignment as a drill sergeant. So it was a humbling experience. I did 7 years in the military before I got medically retired. I got injured in a deployment to Afghanistan, deployed with the Green Berets in 2019. I got an injury during that deployment that led to the eventual medical retirement. I had a couple of side hustles along the way, which is kind of the fun part, a little bit of entrepreneurship spirit, and eventually led to ATL Vets, which I'm sure we'll dive into a lot more. But overall, about 15 years of getting beat up and getting the body broken down. And for being 35, I tuck and roll out of the bed these days. So I don't know if anybody else understands that, but all the cracks and crinkles as I wake up in the morning.
Oh my gosh, not the tuck and roll.
The tuck and roll until you get limber. You know how it is. You got to warm
Have
up a
you
little bit.
ever I'm sure you've come across the comedian and actor Rob Riggle, right?
Oh yeah,
He was
yeah.
he was in the
Marine.
Marine Corps. I just remember in one of his stand-ups, he said, "You don't realize you're old until you start making noises when you bend over."
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm just like, "Yeah, I feel that." Wow, thank you just so much for just letting us get to know a little bit about you, but I'm glad that you mentioned how it was a humbling experience for you going from badass SWAT to then breaking down those layers and that ego. And you said it was humbling, but did you take it well? How did you mentally approach that?
It's funny. I was the old guy, and I was consistently called the old guy because basic training there's like 17 and 18-year olds.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm a decade older, and had already had a knee replacement from a fight on duty. So like I already had one bad knee that the army didn't know about at that time, and it was more one of those. And you know how it went. Don't really have much of a choice, but I was made an example out of because I think they saw if they break the old guy, and the old guy falls in line, everybody else falls in line. So it was an interesting angle where I was the guy that kept everybody else in line. So when the kids were smuggling Skittles into the barracks, I'm the one that was like making them throw it away or more or less the snitch that got everybody smoked. But then me specifically. So then I would then turn around and do all the fun army corrective training after that. So I don't know. They did a great job. My senior drill sergeant did a great job of balancing the humbling piece with the empowering piece, which I think is great leaders in the military. You see that keep them humble, but also empower them to go and lead. And that was like a great first step in that realization.
Approaching it that way. I think it makes you more of like a humble kind of servant leader. Like when you look back on great men and women, the way that they approach things, you're like, dang, if I were in your shoes, I'd be like in my head rolling my eyes into the next dimension. But here is this older gentleman, yeah, like in basic training with 17, 18-year old. I'm so sorry. I'm sure in your head you were just like, what am I dealing with?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. I'm like,
Yeah.
what? Am I sure I made the right decision here? There are many a days where I
Yeah.
was, because I went through 18 months of training straight. So it wasn't just basic training. I went into basic training as an E4 for about the basic training period, then probably another 6 months as an E4. And then I had it written in my contract to go to officer candidate school and then infantry school. So I was gone for about 18 months, and it would have been a little bit longer with Ranger school, but that was about the time I was offered either Ranger school or the deployment. The
Mhm.
deployment was a interesting caveat away. So instead of Ranger, I ended up catching that trip to Afghanistan. So it was definitely a very long period of being called the old dude for sure.
What was your experience like deploying with Green Berets? I'm sure that there was definitely like some lessons learned and some insights to be had like in a team like that.
Yeah, it was a very unique experience, to put it lightly. We went in 2019. It was under Operation Freedom Sentinel, which was under President Trump. And the rules of engagement shifted pretty heavily under him from when President Obama was in office to President Trump. A lot of people don't realize how kinetic we were. And in that 12-month period, we ended up losing about 6 out of 50 guys across Afghanistan. So we had a command sergeant major that ended up being killed in action, as well as several other guys, obviously. So it was unique because we were very active and we did a lot of the whole mission set is train, advise, and assist, right? So the goal is to train and advise and then assist when necessary. But it seemed to get flipped on its head over there pretty heavily, whereas more we train, assist a lot, and try to advise. But too often, I think we ended up taking the responsibility for a lot of the operations when it's not the intentionality, if that makes sense.
Oh, wow. Dang. And then so shortly after that deployment, did you stay in much longer?
I've actually only been officially out for about a year now. Came back to the States in about 6 months before COVID. It wasn't even that long, just a couple months before COVID. So right at the end of 2019, came back. COVID hit. We were doing our whole thing, going through training, and another just dive right back into more training, more gearing for promotions, and started going through a few different things. We were activated a little bit different for COVID. I was trying to transition to the National Guard side, so I started a company during 2020 that ended up being a very good company that we scaled to about 155 countries in 8 months during 2020. So capitalized on the virtual wave, transitioned over to the Guard, go through a couple other training experiences, and then didn't find out I was injured until the beginning one. I went down to do some push-ups, my thumb dislocated, I popped it back into place, and then everything from my elbow down went numb. And come to find out, I had pretty significant nerve damage. Where normally the numbness in your hand happens first, you get the tingles, and then stuff starts going numb. For me, it was opposite. I actually had the numbness never set in, but my hand atrophied pretty heavily. So all the muscle in my hand started getting eaten away. So the thumb dislocating is because I didn't have any muscle around it. So when I popped it back into place, that's when the body recognized, oh crap, we have a nerve that's compressed in your elbow. So I had surgery on it on Fort Benning and now Fort Moore, and they screwed up the surgery pretty heavily. And then after a year of recovery, a 3 hour procedure turned into an 8 hour procedure and two surgeons, and they burned off a bunch of nerve endings in my arm, yada, yada, yada. And after a year of attempted recovery, it was determined I couldn't. They offered me like to go into accounting and finance. And I'm like, I'm not going from. So ended up accepting a medical discharge. That took a year. So 1 year anniversary of officially getting out was last month.
Oh, wow. Okay. Congrats. DD214 Club.
A
Okay.
3 year process, but finally got it.
Yeah, with everything that just happened, I'm so sorry. I hope you're doing well and navigating that like kind of mind body healing, like going through something like that.
These days, we all have that transition story. We can dive into this. Obviously, the resilient piece of the podcast, I think, is huge. We can always dive into this if you want. That transition period, right before the surgery, about 2 weeks before the surgery, I was offered a little bit north of 8 figures for that company that we scaled really well, and ended up turning it down. So on paper, at 32, I have years of really good service, had a business that was really successful. I was heading to a surgery that I knew would end my service career and take away the uniform. So I actually went through a very dark period, almost became a statistic, very close to that piece. And then finally had a healing journey from Q2, April of 2021. For about a year, I went through all the things I needed to go through. Finally got into therapy, finally took the steps necessary, ended up writing and releasing a book about it. And part of that was like such a great healing piece in and of itself, where I did started studying ancient leaders, and come to find out a lot of the ancient Roman leaders, a lot of the Greek leaders were all philosophers, and they were very existential in their thinking and their processes, even from leadership all the way to like personal development. So when I released my book, it was a cool surprise. I ended up releasing number one in mental health and number one in philosophy mythology, which is pretty cool. So it ended up being a great piece of the process for sure.
That's amazing, and I'm so glad that you got into some of the great OG philosophers because 'cause they're pretty badass, and there's so much knowledge in books, and once you open up that world, the options, the knowledge, it's limitless, and I'm proud of you for taking that step to take care of yourself and also finding the silver lining and some success in that difficult patch. So that's really awesome, Zach. I'm so proud of you.
I appreciate it. It was not so fun.
Is
It's kind
it
of part of it.
ever? But also,
Right.
again, some of those philosophers lived some difficult lives.
Yeah.
And so you look at them and you're just like, wow, he still persevered. So I think that's what keeps me motivated to keep going. It's weird because you get into some certain parts of philosophy, and there's the philosophers that kind of it's like they get off on suffering.
So I was actually about to say, the funny part, for better and worse, you go back and look through all that suffering, and they did it to themselves. They did the really good to themselves, they did the really bad to themselves.
Oh, that too, yeah.
And a lot of times, to your point, it's almost like they get off on it, right? If
Yeah.
there's not chaos, they have to create chaos. And
Yeah.
I don't know about you, guilty 100%. And a lot of that, I looked at it when I was studying it all. I have a podcast as well. We're 450 episodes in or so, and it's all about dissecting leadership. And a lot of times is leadership in business or how it translates from personal leadership to professional leadership. And it became a study. And this was part of that study where I used the podcast as a learning tool to learn more about these great, amazing leaders throughout the world. And a lot of it was like when they get bored, right, they have to create some sort of chaos, and they have to create some sort of new, and it's like a level of self-sabotage. And in
Mhm.
the PTSD world, what I didn't realize, part of this whole studying, was like there's so many different factors and sectors of PTSD, with self-sabotage being that piece of it. But when you start really diving into it, it's essentially compartmentalization, where you start compartmentalizing like they tell you to. Your battle buddy gets shot on the field and is dying, you step over and continue the mission, right? You compartmentalize it so you don't impact the mission, but they never teach you to unpack all of that. But it's essentially that self-sabotaging piece. We're not going to deal with that thing that's really uncomfortable, but let's create a different type of discomfort so I can deal with that over here, right? So it's almost like a controlled chaos, but that leads to, and we see it in the veteran space, relationships falling apart, marriages fall apart, twice divorced. So all that self-sabotaging attached to that, but you see all the ancient leaders did the same thing. So if you can get a handle on that, it's fascinating, but also it's a crap. Are we doomed attached to repeating the cycle?
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and it's almost like you're so accustomed to chaos or drama or just something just ruffling up your feathers that when you sit down and you have that peace and quiet or things are going well for you, you have that urge to repeat that cycle. And I've been through that as well. And that's definitely been a very humbling experience knowing, yeah, some things were definitely your fault or your responsibility, and some things were out of your control. But I also reached the point where I'm just like, so focused on getting my life together, I don't have the time or the patience for any BS like that. So I had to cut my own crap, and it's been pretty nice.
Yeah.
Like, it's chill, and I'm like, "Oh, wow, this is nice. Why was I running from this for so
Right.
long?"
And a lot of it's
Um
that boundary setting, right? You have to create those boundaries for yourself. And I looked at it towards family, friends. There was a piece where I retracted from all of it,
Hmm.
but then there became a piece where that's not healthy either. So where's that delicate balance of creating a boundary where there's a piece of it that they don't touch? That's where that disruption piece usually comes in, is if you let too many people, too many chiefs in the kitchen or cooks in the kitchen. We can't be having that. So it's controlling that piece a little bit, but being
Yeah.
mindful of it more than anything.
Yeah. You said that while you were enlisted, you had this company going and then you turned that down. You mentioned that you have a podcast and you're also working with your organization. Are you typically like a multitasker?
I stay so freaking busy, and not necessarily in a good way. Officially, I own 7 companies. And for years, that includes a nonprofit. So founded a nonprofit, but for years, it's like you get bored, you start another company. You get bored, you
Mhm.
start another company. So it starts diluting your focus and your attention. It's interesting. It's funny that the project we scaled really big is off. I still have the media and PR company, but we launched a project that was an international dance competition, and that's what scaled so quickly. That's what we were offered a lot of money for, was for that from a large production company. It's funny. Oh, all right, cool. That went awesome. We geared that. We met some. If you don't join them, they'll beat you type of stuff with big business. So when that project ended, it shifted into, okay, now I'm bored again. So what's the next thing I start? What's the next thing I start? It's good and bad, but the things that have survived the last 5 years with the production company, the podcast, because it's still that trying to be that student aspect attached to learning something new, something more. And there are such great avenues for both of those.
That's amazing. And I'm glad you're honest about it. Sometimes it's good keeping yourself busy. You found your passions and you found things that you're enthusiastic about and good at. How would you say that you juggle it all?
Honestly, yeah, I get told I do too much all the time. I don't see it as juggling. Like I right now compared to a year and a half ago, I feel like I'm hyper focused. And I think I've geared a lot of stuff down. I stepped away from my security company that I started in 2017 because it was one of those, we were near seven figures and COVID crushed us. But I kept it around and kept taking like odds and end jobs that I'd make 10 grand in a weekend. But it's okay, is that really worth it once a month type of thing, or once a quarter is what it really came down to. Is it worth like keeping that just to be distracted every once in a while? So it's really true. It was like backtracked, refocused. In the last year, I've now shifted away from a lot of the battle was the brand, be a tactical leader. My podcast is the tactical leader. So those two things. The battle brand was really for entrepreneurship, business consulting. A lot of stuff fell into that. The production company fell into that. So we've geared that really far down. But what I've learned is if you can find that like one North Star of what is that mission vision that I'm working on, which is ATL vets. And just as a caveat, if anybody outside of Atlanta hears it, ATL stands for Advancing the Line. So when we're outside of Atlanta, we always call it by its full name, Advancing the Line for veterans. But a lot of what we do with the production company has now been engulfed by Advancing the Line because all the PR, the marketing, my videographer, my photographer, all the things that I have in the production company are now the same assets I use for ATL vets. So when we go and do something, it's all in such great alignment all the way around. And in entrepreneurship, you never start this way, but I'm finally in a really comfortable spot of having amazing partnerships across the country where if we want to host an event, we're in Tampa, DC, Virginia Beach, branching out into Dallas, as well as Atlanta, of course. I have a great network in all those cities. So I can like hop to one of those cities, host an event every other month, and then come back to Atlanta and regroup. So it looks like I'm doing a whole lot of things, but really it's guiding towards that one thing, and everything has to feed into that or it's a no. If it doesn't feed well into that, then it's turned down.
Wow, that's awesome. And it's really cool how over time they all flowed into each other. That's nice.
Like a smushing into it. Like I'm going to force this because this is what I really want to do. So we're going to make it
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, I definitely wanted to talk more about advancing the line. What brought you to do that, and how's that going for you now?
Man, it is such a blessing of an organization. We have so many amazing things happening that I could talk all day about. The piece that drove me to it is when I was transitioning out, I was a high level operator on every level so far. SWAT in Atlanta kept me. We did a lot of stuff with the DEA, with FBI task forces. So I was at that top tier of policing in Atlanta and Georgia. Go into the Army, you'd catch a deployment with the Green Berets. What's the next step, right? Is there something, there a thing or two that kind of came to that end, unfortunate end, but I wanted to continue to operate at that level, right? If I'm going to do something, I want to do it really well. I'm going to dedicate myself to doing it. So as I started transitioning and going back into like full-time business ownership, I started looking around. What kind of resources, what kind of community, what's out there for a young executive, right? Again, I just turned down multi eight figures. I'm very successful. Who else in that realm can I network with? Who else can I be in that room with? And I could not find that anywhere. Bunker Labs was one avenue where they were a large national nonprofit that just got bought out by Syracuse University. They were pretty good pre-COVID. Post-COVID, they couldn't rebound. So it ended up being I ended up teaching a little bit for them, and most of those people left and joined my programming because we had better resources. So really it just drove to what did I need as I transitioned? What do I need today as a high achiever? and how can I keep furthering myself, but being mindful of there's so many folks around us, so many veterans, veteran supporters around us that also want and need that hand up. So if there's those people that are like hard charging, ready to go, ready to take action, I want those people to jump in with me because it just helps us all.
That's awesome. I really admire about like true and genuine leaders is like you built and forged your own path and you've reached a level where you feel very confident and competent, and now you're looking back and seeing who else can you empower and raise up to be on the level that you're at. It's purely out of selflessness to share your success with others.
Genuine. It's what they talk about. It's what they say they do. Even corporations or veteran hiring, blah, blah, blah. They want to promote that. They want to
Yeah.
talk about how they raise funds for vets or support vets. But
Yeah.
then you dig into the numbers, and not to totally blow it out of the water, but Bunker Labs is honestly one of those large national organizations, 6.1 million a year, and they only spent 860,000 on veteran programming. And they spent 4.4 million on travel, staffing, hospitality, and logistics. I'm like, that's a misappropriation of funding comparatively, right?
Yeah.
6.1 million, 5 mil needs to go to the vets, right? So don't say you're going to do this and then use all this money, use this amazing impact and empowering that you're thinking about creating, and then just use it to fund you walking down the red carpet at the VMAs or the Country Music Awards taking selfies.
Oh, that must be fun. But yeah, no, I see the real people doing the real work and giving back. And those are the people that I love, that I like to work with, that I like to connect with, that I like to highlight on my podcast. And no, I really mean it from the bottom of my heart. I'm really glad that you're doing that because there's so much to be invested into veterans. And when veterans have purpose, like they will go to the ends of the earth for you. They will
Mhm.
work their butts off for you. And we need someone honest and genuine and real without bad intentions or hidden intentions to empower them and raise them up, educate them, get them to the level that they need to be at. Because from what you and I have heard, and anyone else listening, like sometimes transitioning out of the military can be very difficult, or transitioning from one career field to the other can be very challenging. And so when there's this oversaturated market of empowerment and like these man camps and stuff like that, you're just like, where do I go? What do I do? And so that's why I definitely want to just poke your brain because again, I had heard good things. So I'm like, okay, let's see if it's legit. And it seems really legit. So I'm so grateful that you did that. You're doing it and you're giving back to your people, which in turn it's like, oh my gosh, I hate to say it, but Reagan, trickle down economics, trickle down empowerment and education, like it really does affect everything.
Yeah.
It betters their family life, it betters their community life. So the fact that you're giving back and you turned around and you were like, "Hey, let me see who else I can help." That's amazing. And I think that's probably what has led you to such great success with your podcast, your businesses, and advancing the line.
Yeah. And I won't say it's all completely selfless because there are, of course, benefits attached to it. So if somebody says, "Oh, it's so selfless of you, it's so great of you," I do get benefit out of it as well. It lets me increase the brand, grow the brand. I get awards and accolades all the time, but I think it's the mentality attached to it. And you see this in the military, or saw this in the military, and you see this across the ages when it comes to leadership. And I'm a Dale Carnegie certified guy. I went and taught Dale Carnegie here in Atlanta for a while back in the day, and all the great leaders turn around and share the glory, right? And this is a big piece of what we do with ATL Vets. We have four pillars. Our first pillar, the four pillars are marketing, mindset, movement, and money management. And those are the four things I think veterans struggle with the most. But I put marketing first and foremost because I think that's a huge struggle. Telling your story, sharing your story. A lot of times I don't feel like my story is exceptional. I've done some exceptional things, but I don't think my journey is really exceptional because there's so many veterans that have done so much more or have lost so much more, right? But a piece of it is like, if you don't talk about those experiences to the civilian world, we're all very exceptional because we're still the 1% of, right? And I don't care if you were logistics or infantry or even a Marine, we won't judge them too hard. But either way, you still did that level of service, right? And if we can just step into that piece. So with ATL Vets, what we really are focusing on is not necessarily me getting on the stage, because I thought that was a great avenue for business development, for community building, like getting on a stage, a podcast, a speaking engagement, I spoke for Syracuse University when they were in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago. I think all these things are amazing, but what I realized is there's so many veterans that are nervous to do that. They feel like it's not a safe space. It's not a safe space to share your story. That's what we're taught, right? Don't go to the therapist. Don't share your story because you'll get judged for it. But we put marketing first because we want to build the stage for other veterans. So whether it's highlighting veterans, and that's what we do when we travel around the country, is we highlight veterans, make the connection. We do something very similar with them where they're highlighting local veterans, they're putting out these amazing stories and recordings. We do it a little bit more real time where we have live audience, we live stream it all, and then post recordings on the back end. And then we host annual business conference, a 3-day business conference. We do an annual retreat for about 15 people, 15 vets up in North Georgia, where we want to get that intensive work done. But it's all about building the stage that feels safe enough for a veteran to get onto it. And I think that's like such an amazing piece of what we really are amazing at is here's what we're trying to build. We'll coach you to be good at it. We'll coach and train you to use it. And then whether you want to be an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur, because you're in a corporation and you want to have that entrepreneur mindset, we're going to be right there for you to help you develop those skills you need to really be successful in this civilian world.
And you said that there is a part of you that doesn't necessarily do it out of all and only selflessness. So I'm sure like it's inspiring for you and also like fulfilling in a way watching the journey of other veterans go through that metamorphosis
Absolutely.
under your guise, which it's great that you're in charge of it because you know that you're doing it right.
Yeah, that's a big piece. Seeing and it's kind of cliche, but the aha moment of, oh man, that's what everybody's been trying to tell me, and it finally clicks. And it's funny, we were in Tampa about 3 weeks ago hosting an event, and we highlighted a local guy who's a retired colonel, 30 years in the Army. And people think when you're in that higher level of rank, and you're a 1-star general or you're way up there, oh, the transition's easy. And it's so untrue because after 30 years, you did one thing for 30 years and now you're 50, 45, 50, and you have no freaking clue what you want to do with your life. You have no idea. So this guy had exactly that story. He's like, I did everything right. My retirement's in place, my life insurance, all that things are in place that the Army tells you to do leading up to retirement. And then I had a year of floundering where I was in my head, I was in a dark spot, couldn't figure out what that new mission, that new purpose needed to be for me. And I think that's the piece of like when we find a veteran that is floundering, we find somebody that is putting in the work, is trying, but there's just that one little missing piece. And then we can mentor that. And I say we, because I have a lot of amazing people that are helping in the organization and everything from the workouts we host every month to, again, these networking events, the workshops, the programs we have, an amazing support system, an amazing team. So when we can help that person be like, oh, that's it. That's what I haven't seen because I was too far in the trenches. That's so freaking rewarding, right? And
Yeah.
that's the piece of I wish somebody had smacked me upside the head a few years ago and be like, hey man, this is what that's honestly what happened. Quick story. I was recording a podcast with a dude, he's a spec ops guy, lived in Carolina and wanted to drive down to Atlanta. He's like, I'm gonna drive down to Atlanta, we're gonna record in person. Do you have somewhere we can record? I'm like, I can figure it out. We can make it happen. I got a spot in Buckhead. We can kind of make it work. And we ended up hitting it off really well. And this was before ATL Vets launch, and all the success was on paper, right? It was all before the nonprofit. And he looked at it as, man, you're doing some amazing things. You just hosted your first event, had 120 people show up. The fire marshal said no more than 100. So we like did all the things right, but they bent the rules a little bit. He's like, and you're absolutely wasting your time. What are you talking about? I'm doing all these things. And I'm like, I'm tired. He's like, bro, you're like 33. You're not tired yet. You haven't earned the right to be tired yet. I'm like, dude, I'm still recovering. I had all the excuses, right? I'm doing so freaking much. And I just, like you said earlier, burn out. And he's like, yeah, but you haven't done a single thing yet. And I'm like, what do you mean? He finally explained to me, he's like, you're doing all these things and accomplishing nothing. You're doing nothing for the veteran. You're doing nothing for your brothers and sisters. You're not living the legacy that Will and Joey, the first two guys I lost, like you're not honoring their memory. You're not doing those things. Figure it the F out and go do something. And 2 months later is when we launched ATL Vets. And that's when we got all the paperwork. And it was like somebody hit me upside the head. I was like, hey, man, do something right. Do something that you're really called to do. And we're figuring it all out. But
Yeah.
it was that dude that hit me upside the head and gave me that aha moment.
Yeah, but don't you love that? I've been preaching that the past couple years because I've just noticed I've just personally outgrown a lot of places and people.
which is
And it's
great. That's amazing for the record. Like it sucks at times, but the fact that you're outgrowing stuff is amazing.
yeah. Yeah, it definitely has its a little bit of its grieving process, but it's the people who don't have that person calling them out or they don't listen to them. It can be very dangerous being surrounded by yes men and yes women.
Mhm.
And you want someone to tell you, just like that person told you, like, hey, like, what? Are you for real right now? No, come on. Be for real. You could do more. You could do better. This is just the beginning, or just constructive criticism. I'm all about it. I love it. And even though you can lead a horse to water, you can tell someone just you're upfront, you're honest about it, be like, "Hey, like, you could do better. That
Right.
was messed up," etcetera. You
And
can't force them to do anything
you can waterboard them. I always make a joke about it. I'm like, you can waterboard the horse. You
oh,
can
like,
almost drown the horse, and the horse still ain't gonna be hydrated. So you can't want it more than the horse at the end of
that's
the
a
day.
good one. I might steal that from you. That's
Take it. Take it. It always gets a good laugh. And some people are like, you can't waterboard. I'm like, I know, that's a point, right? Like
yeah.
it's frivolous to go down that path. So really make it a little bit extreme, but understand the point.
I'm glad that you had that person in your corner help you elevate yourself because, again, look at all that you're doing now. And you seem to be juggling it fairly well. I do want to ask you in your personal life, how do you take care of yourself in order for you to show up to do all these things? Am I calling you out right now? You're like, I don't.
Oh, you're calling me out. You're calling me out. So this is like the hardest thing in the world. And it's so funny. And I mentioned a little bit earlier, like I'm divorced twice. When I joined the army, my first ex divorced me. She gave me the ultimatum. If you join, we're divorcing. I didn't believe her. She did it. The second one, we divorced after Afghanistan. I came back. My head wasn't right. At that time, her best friend, her little sister, and my goddaughter all lived into the house I moved back into. So I came back from Afghanistan, moved into this house where I'm supporting these women, and they had created their own little ecosystem. And I was not right in the head. I mean that as veterans understand. Like I couldn't conceptualize why milk was spilled on the counter and not cleaned up. I couldn't conceptualize why mail was put on my desk and not where it should have been. So there would be like these unhinged moments where I truly I got home one day and mail was on my desk. It was right inside the front door. Nobody else was home, but my ex-wife had put mail on the desk and I flipped my desk. I'm like, this is not going to effing happen again. I went on a tangent. Nobody was home, but I like just destroyed my office. And what I realized later is another form of PTSD is attachment. And I was so attached to my thing in Afghanistan. That's all I had for a year. All I had was this 10 by 5 chew that we lived in, and that's all I had control over. So I had to make it, and I got so focused on that. So when you're transitioning back, it was so hard for me to recognize like she could put mail on the damn desk. It doesn't matter, but it mattered so much at the same time. And then I got attached to like my pickup truck, right? I got attached to my dog, like these things that were like, I'm like a broken record. My dog passed about a year ago. My current better half, she wrecked my truck around Thanksgiving. So I'm like, I'm a bad broken record of country music right now because I lost my dog, lost my truck. Joking
Right.
aside, the balance in the personal life is rough. And I finally found a very spicy Italian meatball woman that she's about 5'10" and beautiful and keeps me in check. And I can't stress having such an amazing partner. And that's another boundary I didn't do well. As I came back, was getting divorced, couldn't figure it out. So went on a dating rampage, more or less. And just wasn't serious with anybody in my personal life because that was part of the world I was shutting off. And I can get serious and getting close to anybody, I can't handle it. My current partner Taylor included. She was one of those that we were good friends, and then I essentially sabotaged that friendship and said, I'm not going to do this anymore, and walked away from her for a few months until my brain clicked back on eventually. And she actually told me, she's like, you're an idiot, man. You just need to go ahead and like just you and I, let's just make this happen. And I told her no. And then a couple months later, I'm like, I really am an idiot, and ran back to her. And we finally started dating. But there are boundaries that she and I have worked through. We're in couples counseling together, which I think is a huge thing to have that intermediary that can help her understand my ticks and help me understand a woman and how my ticks might affect her in ways she's not saying, all the way down to everybody knows 5 o'clock on Friday, you do not call me because in my calendar is scheduled Tay time. and her name's Taylor. She goes by Tay time, 5 o'clock on Friday. If you call me at 5:01, I'm not answering. If you call me at 4:59, I am not answering, or I'll say you have 30 seconds, hurry up. And it's a running joke, but I am that structured around my personal life being a priority. I'm great at everything else. I'm terrible at relationships. So how do I really create that same energy and focus there? And she's a great accountability partner, the prettiest drill sergeant I've ever had. Like, she makes me do
Oh.
push-ups. She loves making men cry. Perfect for somebody like me to reel me in a little bit.
Oh my gosh, Zach, that's amazing. You have a partner that's supportive and holds you accountable, because it's like how you were mentioning earlier, like you veterans, people who have all this potential, and you're just like, what can I do to make it better? And sometimes you can just set up the environment in order for them to
Mhm.
thrive and to grow. And
100%.
when you feel safe and when you have the tools, y'all are in couples therapy, like y'all can communicate better. So if you are a little on edge or something does tick you off, you have the tools to do better and to make that the new habit versus what you were previously doing. I'm sorry that you had to go through all that.
So, like, a lot of it was terrible going through it. And I love the analogy of the buffalo versus the cow in the storm. If you ever heard the analogy, so when a storm's coming in, a cow will run the opposite direction, and eventually the storm catches up, and the cow ends up in the storm for longer, whereas the buffalo turns towards the storm and runs through it, knowing it'll be a shorter storm, right? Because they're able to get through it quicker. And it's an interesting analogy where I look back and, man, a lot of that sucked really bad, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't have had a book or a story to tell. I wouldn't have truly valued her, right? I wouldn't have allowed myself to be loved again. A big piece. I
Yeah.
wouldn't have turned to loving myself again. That's my book is all about that piece, a legacy of love, a journey of self mastery. It's all about that journey of finding myself again outside of a uniform. And a lot of us don't do that as veterans. We just don't allow ourselves to think in that way. It's not macho, quote unquote, right? But it's something that you have to challenge yourself to do. And it's one of the hardest challenges I faced was the guy in the mirror.
Absolutely. And I think I actually had a breakthrough similar to that in therapy, and it was like you don't get over things, you get through things. And even just that, the difference in terminology is just huge, because it really does make all the difference, just like your buffalo and cow analogy, which is actually pretty cool because
I had to
buffalo.
bring that up because I saw the Colorado University, so I was hoping you would understand the correlation there.
Yes, the buffalo. Yeah, I love it. It's good to see that you're putting in the work in your personal life as well. And I'm sure that helps you show up in your professional endeavors a whole lot better too.
100%. I can't stress that correlation. Having her on my arm going into any room, it's empowering, it's confident, knowing she's got my back, like almost that safety blanket aspect. And it's funny, she says the same about me, where she hates going anywhere unless I'm around. I would claim to be an introvert. She actually is an introvert, but without each other, like, we don't like to go do. We're like a couple of grandparents. Like, we sit around on the sofa, don't do anything. Our one thing on Friday night is like queso and margaritas, and that's all we do. That's how we live life, and that's awesome. Love it.
Queso and margaritas.
It's the
Yeah.
jam.
This is our time, and that's awesome. I sincerely applaud you for hustling and putting in all the elbow grease in your professional and your personal endeavors. That's huge. So, like, you're talking the talk and you're walking the walk, and I love that. You know
That's
what I
that's why I love Ryan Reynolds and his character. If you're a Marvel nerd,
mean?
Deadpool
Yes.
does all the right things all the wrong ways. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much me. It's perfect. It's
Like,
perfect.
it works.
Yeah.
Um, okay, you briefly mentioned your book. So where can people find them? Where can we buy them? Where can we read them?
So the right now I only have the one released. I'm working on the Legacy of Leadership. It's the one
Okay.
I meant to write, and then had the revelation of you have to lead yourself before you can really lead others. I ended up writing that personal leadership book first. It's a legacy of love. It's across Amazon. I've been told I need to do an Audible, so we're working towards that a little bit. But definitely, it's on Amazon, easy to find, an easy avenue for the podcast for all the things. Zack A Knight. Make sure you put the A in there. ZackAKnight.com. I part of the marketing thing. You Google Zack Knight, and it's an indie pop singer with a beautiful head of hair. It's not me, so I had to
Sure.
overcome. I could be
You're
mean
not
to
like
her.
Hannah Montana?
Don't tempt me now.
Okay,
I,
gotcha, gotcha.
I actually,
Okay.
for Halloween, I did wear one. I dressed up as Taylor for Halloween. Had a beautiful blonde wig on. It was awesome.
Oh, yeah, that is
It was
awesome.
great.
Okay, so
Sorry.
you are not the pop star.
No, I was told I looked like Fat Thor. I'm like,
Oh
okay,
my
thanks.
who said that? Oh my god.
It was amazing. I'm like, okay, that's fair. Touche.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. Oh my goodness.
Oh, good. Sorry.
Okay. So your link has all of your book, and then it will link your upcoming book when it's released and your podcast and everything else. So I want to ask you, we're in May and this year has just flown by. What are some goals or upcoming projects that you hope to accomplish or that are in the works for you, if you can share, that you want to get done in 2024?
Yeah, the big thing, the big hurdle we were trying to overcome, we actually did this week. I've been running a program for entrepreneurship for about 3 years. We finally rebranded it and relaunched it. We ran it up until February this year when we did our first retreat, and then took a step back and said, all right, we have to reshape this to be more welcoming. So we relaunched it officially this past Monday, and it's called Vet Ops, Veterans Optimizing Professional Success. And it's our flagship program, and it's all about workforce development, entrepreneurship development for that, exactly what we're talking about, right? That mid management, the executive, the high achiever that wants to figure out that piece they're missing. So we had our first workshop this past Monday. We're doing monthly workshops, virtual, and everything's going to fold into that. So that's one big goal out of the way, thankfully. We're looking at programming our second annual conference sometime in the August or September timeframe. But MIC, the Military Influencer Conference, is in Atlanta this year. And I'm trying really hard not to compete with them. I'm meeting with a guy next week about speaking at it. So I'm trying not to compete with MIC. So we're figuring all those out. And the final thing at the end of the year, maybe beginning in 2025, is we're going to buy our own facility for ATL Vets headquarters. And it's going to be a professional development center where we're going to host a lot of these events. We're going to have a full gym, a fully operating gym, like a CrossFit gym with group classes, so on and so forth. We're looking to do that in North Atlanta, hopefully at the end of the year, but that might be 2025 before we can accomplish that one.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so exciting. Are you pumped? How do you feel about all that? You
I'm
feel good?
stoked. We have so many things in the right position for that. And so many guys, gals, vets don't want to talk about their feelings. They want to talk about mindset. They want to do all this other stuff, but they will happily come out for a workout. And we do workouts at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Our next one is May 26th. We do a workout at Mercedes-Benz Stadium where the Falcons play, and Taylor runs the workouts for us. She's the head of our movement pillar. So we do like a team building group fitness class at the stadium. We do that a couple times every year. And that's like the best way for people to come in. Come get an easy, chill. I say easy. Come get a chill workout in with us. We do a little bit of communion afterwards, eat some food, tailgate. Is the best way to bring the community together. And then we can do the other things. Then we can talk about feelings. Then we can do blah, blah, blah. So I think the facility is going to let us be able to 10X that, just having a true hub to operate out of every day.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. Even though advancing the line is acronymed ATL Vets, can anybody join and sign
Yep.
up?
Yep, it is open to everybody, veterans, veteran supporters. So if you're not a veteran, you're a family member of veteran, or you just love the veteran community, some of our biggest supporters here in Atlanta are not veterans, but they understand that we're the backbone of the country. We're the backbone of so many things. We truly open our doors to everybody. That includes our Vet Ops program. You don't have to be a veteran. We want to focus on veterans, but I don't want to exclude, because I believe if we want to learn something new as an Army guy, if I want to learn something new, I need a non-veteran in the room to teach me. Right? I don't want another Army guy teaching me the same thing I've already learned.
Yeah.
So how do I bring in external experts? And I think the best way to do that is keep our doors open for everybody. You can find out all of that stuff. atlvets.org is our website. We have an events page with a rolling calendar. So you'll see when we're going to Tampa, Virginia Beach, DC, of course, Atlanta pretty frequently. And then our programs page that highlights Vet Ops, highlights our networking engagements, and several things we get. We got a lot of, we do about 10 events a month. So we got a lot going on, and we'd love to catch people at it for sure.
Yeah, that's
Including
awesome.
you, Jess. I can see you in the workout and at the end of the month. I can see it happening.
Crying? Yeah. Yeah, I'll
Just
be there.
alongside him crying.
I was literally just, you mentioned that on the 26th. I was like, I think I'm open on the 26th. Let's
Yeah,
go.
y'all heard her say it. She's gonna be there.
Let me put on my cute little workout outfit. Yes.
Um,
Okay. That's awesome that you acknowledged that approach to keeping that level of growth open by letting everybody in. And that's awesome. And so for my audience, anyone listening, go check out his Instagram page, his web page. Again, you don't have to be a veteran to join, and that's even cooler. Zach, is there anything else that you'd like to leave the audience with?
I think that's the big piece. I appreciate you let us talking about all of that. Again, you mentioned it, ATL vets across all, or actually, we're advancing the line across all social media, or Zack Knight across all social media. We have a lot of amazing things going on, but it all boils down to whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's that professional development piece, you got to take action. So that first action step of something as simple as just coming to a workout at the end of the month, the big piece I leave with everybody is just take action. Don't be afraid to jump into our community and figure out how we can help build each other up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time and your story, Zach. I really appreciate you. And I will be sure to link all episode page. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.